Okay, well, good morning, everyone. We're gonna
Good morning.
begin. We did a lot of Gemara yesterday, so let's go over the first piece that we did had to do with the meaning of a teaching that was stated earlier. The teaching was the ein nirin chatzoin. It said that you do not come to the Beis Hamikdash in chatzoin in parts. Very vague, it's that what does that mean? Don't come in parts. And so Rav Yosef wanted to say what that meant was that if a person has a lot of children, a lot of sons, you shouldn't bring some today and some tomorrow. Ein nira chatzoin. You shouldn't be seen. In other words, do the mitzvah of re'iyah, being seen by Hashem. Beis Hamikdash, don't be seen in parts. Bring everyone together. So Abaye tells Rav Yosef, and this is on the top of the page of 7b, on the top of 7b, Abaye tells Rav Yosef, Shita, this is obvious, of course. How could you even think of bringing some today and some tomorrow? And who are you going to decide is going to come today and consider them zrizin, which means people who rush to do a mitzvah? And who are you going to consider poishim, which means who's going to be considered sinners, which means that they are lazy, that you're going to bring them tomorrow? How are you going to choose? And why are you going to make some of them, how could you allow some of them to be considered poishim, which literally means like a guilt or a sin, a rebellious sin. So who are you going to put in that category? You're going to have some of your kids come today, great. There's reason, they're rushing to do a mitzvah. And the others are going to be poishim, they're like a poisheya, a sinner. And the way Rashi translated it means atzlanim. They are going to be the lazies. So therefore, the Gemara then comes and says, no, it must mean something else. There must be a different meaning to the concept of chatzoin, of what it means that you're not supposed to divide up a group into two or something, come in parts, whatever that means. And the Gemara explains another interpretation. Now, what's interesting is when the Gemara says pshita, obviously, Abaye, to the third word on the top of the page, pshita, this is obvious. So the mitzvah of zrizus, or the trait, I should say, a personal trait of zrizus, rushing to do a mitzvah, that Abaye claims is obvious. Of course it has to be. Of course you have to be zrizin. Everyone should come the first day. So one of the commentaries mentions, we see from there that the law of zrizin makdimin lemitzvahs, that it's a mitzvah to rush to fulfill a mitzvah, that is something that's obvious in the Torah. In other words, it's as if it's clear in the Torah. I don't know what the source, the source is this Gemara, but where the actual source in the Torah is, maybe from Ein Machmitzin Es HaMatzos, the Gemara says, Ein Machmitzin Es HaMitzvahs, you're not supposed to make the mitzvahs into chametz, that if you leave it around and you don't do it, you sort of make it become chametz. So maybe that's the actual source in the Torah. But the fact that the Gemara says pshita, it teaches us this important rule of zrizus. Yes, Ezra.
Don't you learn that from Abraham? That
maybe,
even though he was
Ayashkim, he got up early in the morning.
Either that, or the fact that his tent doors were all open in all directions, and he was always looking to bring in guests and work.
Vayoratz lakrosam.
Yeah.
Right, he ran to the guests to show. Well, he ran to show them honor. It doesn't necessarily mean for the mitzvah.
Well,
mean,
he's trying to Achnasat Orchim. That's the reason why he was doing that.
So maybe you learn it from Abraham. You have a few stories with Abraham, right? Okay. There is a Gemara that mentions in machmitzin es the pasuk says in machmitzin es amatzos. We learn in machmitzin es mitzvahs that you don't make mitzvahs chametz and let them become rise by waiting around. So you don't wait around for mitzvahs, but this Gemara seems to tell us that it's a din, like a din d'oraisa. It's a biblical law that a person should rush to do a mitzvah. So maybe that's the source, Ezra Shkayach. Yeah, good point. So now there seems to be a debate between Abaye and Rav Yosef here. What was Rav Yosef thinking? He wanted to say this is the meaning, and Abaye tells him that can't be. So what was Rav Yosef thinking? Rav Yosef says that if you have 10 kids, you can do some today, some tomorrow. You might think that that's okay, and the statement of the Brisa that says in Ner and Chatzoin tells you no, don't do that. You might think that that's okay, but the Brisa says no, it's not okay. And our Abaye says that would never be even a thought. Shita, that can't even be a thought. So it could be that Rabbi Yosef understood that the mitzvah of going to the Beis HaMikdash in bringing a korban is really only the adults. The children just have to come. And so maybe it's not so important if the children don't come on the first day. Maybe something along those lines. And Abaye is saying that, no, of course they have to fulfill the mitzvah. Maybe something along those lines. Somehow you have to try to figure out how to explain Rabbi Yosef here. Why would he think that it's okay? And Abaye says that's impossible. Maybe he thought that zrizos is a eitza tova. Maybe it's just a good trait. Maybe you could learn that way. Or maybe you could somehow fit it into the laws of the korban or of coming to the Beis HaMikdash. But in any event, Abaye holds that for sure this can't be the meaning of this brisa that says in Ner and Chatzoin you can't come in parts. So then the Gemara says it must be like Acherim says, and that was a Gemara that we really learned a while back. That it had to do with the fact that there are people that their job causes them to have a smell, and people are not going to join them. So those people would be exempt because the mitzvah of coming to B'yoy Regel is only if you're capable of your potential to be in one group, and those people aren't capable of being in one group. Now, I did mention the last time that the Rambam does hold that they're exempt only while they smell. But after they shower and clean themselves completely and give themselves a good smell and put on some cologne, they would also be obligated in joining. It's only while they have that smell that they are exempt from Re'iyah. But otherwise, at least that's the way the Rambam learns. it's not necessarily the simple meaning of the Gemara. The simple meaning of the Gemara would sound like maybe they're totally exempt. And so what it seems is maybe that the Rambam is talking about people who are capable of cleaning themselves and having a good smell, while the other views that argue on the Rambam would hold that we're dealing with people. There are people that are incapable of cleansing themselves because they work all year round in such schmutz that it just doesn't leave. It's sort of like becomes part of their the smell. It's part of their nature of their body, that it gives off this. It has a certain smell from the work they do, and the type of and it talks about different types of materials that cause this different types of work. Like even matzaref nechoshes sounds like maybe there's a smell when you swelled copper, or bursi. There obviously is a smell when you work the leathers, tanning the leathers. So and then of course the makametz is someone who cleans up the dog do. I guess they didn't have gloves in those days, so whatever it is, somehow I guess there were, that there could be a situation where a person has that smell that it just can't leave their body. In any event, it seems to be an argument between the Rambam and others if they're totally exempt, or if they're only exempt while they have that smell, but when they shower and bathe and get rid of the smell, if they would be obligated. But anyway, that's the Gemara from before the Mishnah. Then the Mishnah came around. This is a new Mishnah that talks about the sacrifices, and it talks about what monies can you use for the sacrifices. Now, I gave an example yesterday about using your tithing money for tuition. And would a person be allowed to use that? If a person, let's say, makes $100,000 a year, and so they have $10,000 that they're obligated in giving as charity. At least the understanding is different discussions about how big of an obligation is Meiser, a person's 10% that they're supposed to give to charity. It's a little unclear in Shulchan Aruch. Very interestingly, we think of it as a definite obligation. It is a little vague in the Shulchan Aruch, but it is discussed in the later Paiskim, and definitely a person should do it. And in fact, it's even ideal a person gives 20%. And so there is a lot of discussion about using money for tuition, and there's a certain age of, basically we can't use Meiser. You can't use your tithing money for something that you're obligated in. So, for example, you have your $10,000 that you want to give to charity because it's 10% of your $100,000 that you earned. So that $10,000 you put in a separate account, let's say, and you have your account. It's called your Meiser account. And then you want to buy matzah for Pesach. Say, let me use this my $10,000 right there. Great, I'll use my money for matzah. And Sukkot comes around and say, I'll use my $10,000 I have to buy lulav and esrog. Let me buy a lulav and esrog with that money. So you're basically using charity money that's meant for charity for an obligational mitzvah. That is not acceptable. You can't use that money now. You can't use it for, you're doing a mitzvah with it. It's money being used for a mitzvah, but that is an obligation mitzvah that you can't use it for. You use it for charity, which is what it's meant for. You could use it to buy someone else's lulav and esrog if they can't afford it. You could use it to buy someone else's matzah for Pesach because they can't afford it, so you're giving them charity. But you can't use it for your matzah to fulfill your mitzvah on Pesach. You can't use that Meiser money. So can you use it for tuition? So it really depends on the situation. And there's also there's an interesting article that I just get it over here. There's an interesting article here I saw online where he brings that Rav Moshe Feinstein had an issue with this. Let me begin. He says, can one use Meiser for tuition payments? He says the general rule is that one cannot use Meiser to pay for mitzvahs that a person is otherwise obligated to do. For instance, there's a mitzvah to pay back a loan. But because one is obligated to pay his loan regardless, you can't use Meiser for that. So his example is paying a loan. You can't do it with your Meiser money, even though it's a mitzvah. Accordingly, we would need to determine whether one is obligated to pay for his child's tuition. There's a halacha that one is obligated to teach his son at the very least Chumash. This would mean that one definitely cannot use Meiser money for his son's early education. Now, there is no such obligation to teach Torah to one's daughters. So therefore, it would seemingly be permissible to use tuition for your daughter's education. The Shulchan Aruch Harav says that one may use Meiser money for older boys' tuition, which basically means that for an older boy, you're not obligated anymore in teaching them. You've fulfilled your obligation already of teaching them, and by using, you could use your Meiser money for their tuition now because it's not an obligation; it's considered extra. Of course, everyone does it. Everyone, pays their tuition for their kids, but it's not biblically. It's not official obligation, or even rabbinically. And the Aruch HaShulchan Chofetz Chaim disagree and rule that one cannot use Meiser for boys' tuition. Interesting. So it seems there is a more strict view. Now, practically speaking, Rav Moshe Feinstein makes the entire discussion moot by pointing out that in today's society, it's very interesting, in today's society, one is legally required to send his children to school. You have no option to keep them home because a person could go to jail, I think, if they, I don't know how much they enforce this rule, but if a person doesn't send his kids to school, it's illegal, at least under a certain age. So he has no option to keep them home, and also certainly cannot send them to a public school. Therefore, under the circumstances, he is obligated to send both his boys and girls to Jewish schools. This would mean that he cannot use Meiser money for either, as long as they are of age when one is legally required to send them to school. So that's a quite extreme view that I don't know that people really follow that view, because it basically prohibits using Meiser money even for girls, and it basically is saying that based on the fact that it's illegal to keep your kids home, let's say your daughters, according to American law, you are obligated in sending them to school, and therefore it's considered a necessity where you can't say, oh, I'll use my Meiser for it. You're obligated. You have no option of not. Yes, Yehuda.
What about people who homeschool their children?
Yeah, so nowadays, Rav Moshe Feinstein's statement was mentioned when it was not common to have online school and things like that, and it was illegal. Nowadays, maybe things have changed. I don't know what the American law, the United States law is now with regard to homeschooling. There definitely are a lot of kids on online schools that are at home, but even there's a tuition. It's not free. And,
no. I'm talking about where the parents are teaching the kids themselves.
Right. So it used to be probably against the law. I don't know. And that's why Rav Moshe would say that, said his view. is based on the fact that you have to send your kids to school. You can't send them to a public school. So therefore, you can't use your Meiser money for tuition. Now, if one has a choice to send a child to a school that charges less tuition, and he sends his children to a school that he feels is better for the child, but it charges more, that you could use your Meiser to cover the difference in price.
Right.
If he could convince the school to give him a break in tuition based on his financial situation, he could pay the extra amount using Meiser money. I don't know why he would. If they gave him a break, why would he be paying the extra? But
Right.
I guess he could. The Tzitz Eliezer, he argues that if one cannot afford to pay tuition unless he uses Meiser money, he definitely should pay the tuition from his Meiser. Even Rav Moshe agrees that if a school is charging more than it should according to his income, then he can pay the difference from Meiser. When it comes to building funds and other similar fees, if they're obligatory for the parents, one would not be able to use Meiser. However, if they are not enforced, then you could use your Meiser. At least this is one view. I'm not telling you everyone agrees with every detail in this article. It's definitely an acceptable authority, but there are other authorities, and every person should ask their Rav about this. But he's taking a more strict stance, it seems like. And then he says that he brings an important point from the Shulchan Aruch Harav, which means the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, that he points out that the Chazal say that when it is decreed how much money a person will make during a given year, the amount he spends on Talmud Torah is not counted towards the total. In other words, it is free money. So why would one waste his Meiser funds on that when he could use them for something else? Because the tuition money is anyway not part of what was decreed that you're going to get. It's extra. It's Hashem is going to give it to you anyway. So that's this article. There are other articles that don't seem to bring Rav Moshe's view, and they say that girls' tuition is definitely okay, and if you divide the tuition up, only the money that they're paying the teachers from the tuition is what can't be used for Meiser, but the money that's for the dorm maybe could be used. Money, the money that they're using for food and all that maybe could be used for your Meiser, and it's only the actual education that would be a problem, and it depends on the age of the children and so on. So there are a number of details that go into this, but that's a little, a concept that's connected to the Gemara that we're learning about using Meiser funds for an obligation. And the case that we're talking about specifically is you have Meiser Sheni money. So it's not exactly the same. We're talking about in our Gemara here, in our Mishnah, that a person has crops and they want to give Meiser Sheni and eat it in Jerusalem. What would they do? So they have, let's say, they have olive trees, and they have 100 cases of olives. Now it's a little heavy. In other words, they made 1,000 cases of olives. They produced from this year 1,000 cases of olives, and now they're want to do the Meiser Sheni, which is you take a tithing of that and you bring it to Jerusalem and you celebrate. So you could take 100 cases of olives, bring it to Jerusalem, and celebrate there and invite people. Oh, anyone that wants, we're celebrating, thanking God for this, for all the produce that I was merited to. That I have, that my trees grew, and we had a good year, and here, enjoy the olives. You could do that. It's just it's going to be very hard to bring 100 cases to Jerusalem. So what you could do is take the 100 cases, say each case is worth, $500, whatever. So, 100 cases, $500 each. I'm going to use this money, $50,000, $5,000, whatever, 50,000, 500 each case times 100. So is 50,000. So $50,000 you take to Jerusalem, and you bring it and you have it in Jerusalem. It's not too heavy. $50,000. You put it in your backpack, and you bring it to Jerusalem, and you could buy over there sacrifices. But which sacrifices can you buy with this Meiser Sheni money? So in other words, you could buy all different types of food, and including meat. But if you're buying meat, you basically bring it as a sacrifice and you eat the meat. A peace offering would generally be the sacrifice. But what type of peace offering? Could you bring a Chagiga offering? And so you're anyway going to Jerusalem for the holiday. So could you bring that money with you and buy all these Chagiga offerings, the holiday offerings, and you basically used your Meiser Sheni money, and you're celebrating in Jerusalem with your holiday sacrifices. So the thing is, our Mishnah deals with that. So the Mishnah says that the oilos, that the burnt offerings, and it mentions them about on Chol HaMoyed, not on Yom Tov, but on Chol HaMoyed, the burnt offerings have to come from chulin, from unconsecrated money. It can't come from the Meiser Sheni money. The burnt offerings on Chol HaMoyed have to come from the unconsecrated money. But the shlamim, and here when we say the word shlamim, we're referring to the Shalmei Simcha, which means the rejoicing sacrifices. This is not the Chagiga, this is the Shalmei Simcha. We'll deal with the Chagiga a little later in the Mishnah, but here the Mishnah talks about the peace offering of joy. And that peace offering of joy was an interesting offering because it wasn't exactly an obligation, because the obligation was to rejoice with meat, but you didn't have to use a Shalmei Simcha sacrifice to have meat. You could have brought your other sacrifices that you were bringing for other reasons. Your son had a bar mitzvah, so you said, I'm donating an animal to the Beis Hamikdash, and then you bring it with you when you go for the holiday, and you're bringing now the sacrifice to the Beis Hamikdash, and you're gonna enjoy that meat from that bar mitzvah pledge sacrifice, that you fulfilled your mitzvah of simcha on Yom Tov, right? Because the mitzvah is really just having meat. It's not bringing a sacrifice of shalmei simcha. It's not to bring an extra sacrifice. You could bring any sacrifice, and when you eat the meat, you're fulfilling the mitzvah of shalmei simcha, of simcha. So shalmei simcha is just an alternative option of how to fulfill the mitzvah of simcha, is by bringing a sacrifice called the shalmei simcha. So the Mishnah tells us that if you go to the Beis Hamikdash, and each day of the holiday you're supposed to rejoice. And how do you rejoice with meat? It has to be animal meat. And how do you? What's the method that it's done? You buy a sacrifice, bring it as a peace offering. And you can use your Meiser Sheni money that you brought with you for each day of the holiday. You'll have that meat. So the Shalmei Simcha peace offering is edible for 2 days. That's the way peace offerings are. It's Shnei Yomim V'Layla Echad. So you would have it for 2 days. You could have meat, and then what you would do is bring another one. 2 days later, you bring another one. So the peace offering could be Min HaMeiser, could be used. You could use your Meiser Sheni money, and you're fulfilling the mitzvah of simcha with Meiser Sheni money, and that's the rule of this simcha of Yom Tov. The whole concept of the simcha is commonly done with other obligations. In other words, you're fulfilling your simcha with the Meiser Sheni. In other words, what are you really doing? What you're really doing is celebrating your Meiser Sheni sacrifice. while you're doing that, you're actually getting a mitzvah called Shalmei. You're actually doing a Shalmei Simcha, because Shalmei Simcha is commonly done. The mitzvah of Simcha, I should say, is commonly done with obligational sacrifices. So, in other words, your pledges that you pledged already and things like that. Now, the Mishnah continues and it says that Yom Tov Rishon shel Pesach, the first day of Pesach, when you bring your Shalmei Chagiga, here we're talking about not the joyous peace offering, we're talking about the holiday peace offering. So the holiday peace offering was supposed to be brought on each Yom Tov. Now, what's interesting about Pesach was that there was an additional sacrifice called the Chagiga on Erev Pesach, the day before Pesach. Yes. And that sacrifice that was brought on Erev Pesach, we commemorate nowadays with an egg. You know, if you think of your Seder plate, why do we have, some people use a shank bone or a chicken or a neck of a chicken or some type of a bone you use for the Seder plate. And then opposite it, you use an egg. Why is that? What's the egg for? So that the shank bone or the chicken neck, whatever your custom is, that is meant as a commemoration of the Paschal offering. The egg commemorates the Chagiga offering, the holiday offering. What do you mean? It's Erev Pesach. It's not the holiday yet. The answer is that, well, it's a certain type of holiday on the day before Pesach, the holiday of it's the holiday of sacrificing the Paschal offering. Paschal offering was not sacrificed on Pesach. It was sacrificed on the day before Pesach.
Was it?
I'm sorry?
Was it?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yes.
The Chagiga offering is offered on Erev Pesach.
And there's another one that was brought on the holiday.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. The Chagiga that on the Erev Pesach, why was that brought? So in order to eat the Pesach, the Paschal offering, with satisfaction that you're already satisfied, now you're eating it as a dessert. You're supposed to eat the Paschal offering as a dessert. So therefore, we bring a sacrifice called the Chagiga offering to eat and be full. Erev Pesach, the day before Pesach, we want to be full and satisfied with that. And then you have the Paschal offering, that's dessert. Now, if you think the afikaiman that we have at the Seder, that is meant to be like that's the dessert that we use to commemorate. We commemorate the Paschal offering, or the matzah that was eaten with the Paschal offering. Different opinions, but that's the afikaiman is basically symbolizes that dessert, which was the Paschal offering, or the matzah with the Paschal offering. So basically, our Mishnah here is telling us about the first day of Pesach. This is not the Erev Pesach Chagiga. This is the first day of Pesach, the sacrifice that was brought called the Chagiga, the holiday sacrifice. In each of the holidays, you were supposed to bring this sacrifice. The Mishnah mentions the Pesach one. We'll see in the Gemara, it had to do with comparing it to the Erev Pesach one. So that's why the Mishnah mentions the Pesach one. We'll see in the Gemara that. But it really doesn't only mean the first day of Pesach. It means the first day of Sukkot, the first day of Shavuos. That Chagiga offering, Beis Shammai says that it has to be from Chulin. You can't use your Meiser money even for part of it. Beis Hillel says that you could use it from Meiser, you could use from your Meiser money to pay for that. And it doesn't mean that you could buy it completely with your Meiser money. It means that you could mix in Meiser with your Meiser money with the unconsecrated money. So it's min ha-Meiser could be partially from Meiser. Now, the meaning behind that is that when you're having this sacrifice, what is the measure? What is the amount you really need for this sacrifice, this chagiga? So our Mishnah, the first Mishnah in our tractate, told us a minimum amount, either 1 ma'ah or 2 ma'ahs, right? Depending on Bishamai, Beis Hillel. There was a minimum amount for this sacrifice. What happens if you want to buy a huge animal that's worth $1,000? So you're not just buying the obligation, you're buying extras. So when you're buying extras, that's where it would make sense. You might be able to kick in that extra money from Meiser, because this is not the obligation Chagiga. This is the extra amount of the Chagiga. Or you're buying more sacrifice, more Chagigas that you don't really necessarily, you're not obligated to bring. So the idea of using some Meiser money and some unconsecrated money is understood when you understand obligation, and there's bonus. So, for example, based on this idea, a question you may have is, I want to buy my lulav and esrog. I'm a little tight with money. Now, I could buy a lulav and esrog for $50 or $75, but I want to buy a $200 lulav and esrog. Maybe I could use my $75 of unconsecrated money from my lulav and esrog, and the extra $125 to get a $200 lulav and esrog, maybe I could use Meiser money for that. So that would be the idea, similar to this idea here, where Beis Hillel says you could mix in some of the Meiser money for your Chagiga sacrifice. Now, the Mishnah then continues and says that in order to fulfill the Shalmei Simcha, the Mishnah now says that in order to fulfill the Shalmei Simcha, it's not very hard, because you all have pledges that you've pledged throughout the year. And on the holiday, you come and bring those pledges. It's an opportune time, because you have a mitzvah to bring it before the first holiday. Moitzas fasecha tishmar, you have to keep your words, your pledges. And there's a prohibition of bal ta'acher, you're not allowed to push off the sacrifice. Of course, the ideal thing would be to bring it the earliest time possible. And Bal Ta'acher, is not transgressed unless it's the three holidays, but the mitzvah is to bring it is the first holiday possible. And so you're anyway traveling to Jerusalem, bring it along. So you bring the sacrifice that you've promised, the nedarim and nedavos, or you bring the money along, and then you buy it in Jerusalem. Either way, however you're doing it, and you bring those sacrifices for the holiday. And now, when you have those sacrifices, what happens? You're eating the meat. Eating the meat, you fulfilled simcha, the mitzvah of rejoicing on meat, because there's a special mitzvah of rejoicing on meat. And I guess in those days, they didn't know anything about vegetarianism and the unhealthy elements of having so much cholesterol or whatever. But it's definitely the mitzvah is to rejoice with meat, and you could fulfill that obligation of Shalmei Simcha, of having joy, rejoicing, with the obligational sacrifice. I shouldn't say obligational. Your pledged sacrifices that you need to bring, you could fulfill your mitzvah of Simcha. So the Mishnah said Yisrael, a regular Israelite, fulfills his obligation with nedarim and nedavos, with these pledges. Two types of pledges. There's the neder pledge, where you promise to give an animal, and then the nedava pledge is where you say this animal is consecrated for sacrifice. So neder is more of an obligation on you, And the dava is actually specifying which animal is being donated, and you would then bring it to the Beis Hamikdash and sacrifice it. So you could fulfill your mitzvah of simcha with those sacrifices and Meiser Behema. Your animals, you have a lot of animals. So your animals, your animals gave birth to 100 animals this year. So what do you need to bring to the Beis Hamikdash? Meiser Behema. You need to bring 10 animals to the Beis Hamikdash. You're tithing of animals. So you would bring those 10 animals to the Beis Hamikdash. It's called Meiser Behema, and sacrifice them. There's one of the sacrifices called Meiser Behema. Habachar v'hameiser v'apesach kachem kalim. Right, the Bechar Meiser and Pesach. We read it in the davening in the Karbanis. The Meiser is eaten l'chol adam. Meiser shina b'achilasan. They're different in their eatings. Habachar nechal hakainim. Meiser l'chol adam. The Bechar is eaten to the kainim, but the Meiser could be eaten by anyone. And nechalim l'chol here, they're eaten in the whole city. L'chol meichol, with any other foods. The shnei yom v'layla echad. 2 days and 1 night. So the Meiser Behema is brought. You would bring it then to the Beis Hamikdash. That would be the opportune time to bring. You're anyway traveling to the Beis Hamikdash. You'd bring your Meiser Behema, and when you sacrifice it, guess what? You fulfill the obligation of rejoicing. So it means you don't have to go buy a new animal. You use that Meiser Behema animal that you're anyway bringing. You're bringing 10 of them. So you have one the first day, you have one the second day, you have one the third day. Each day of the holiday, you bring one of your sacrifices and you invite all your friends and you have and your family and you have the Meiser Behema. You're fulfilling the mitzvah of Simcha without buying anything new using those Meiser Behema. So you have your Nedarim, your pledge sacrifices and Nedavos, and you also have your Meiser Behema. Now the Kohanim have it even easier. Why? Because they get to eat the Kohanim can get to eat a certain part of the sin offerings and the guilt offerings. So when people bring their sin offerings and guilt offerings, the Kohanim get part of that to eat, and they get the Bechar. Remember, we said we also say Bechar in the davening. The Bechar is eaten by the Kohanim. So when a firstborn is born to the an Israelite's animal herd, so they bring it to the Beis Hamikdash, and they give it to the Kohen, and the Kohen they give it to the Kohen, and it's sacrificed. So it's they bring it to the Beis Hamikdash and it's sacrificed, and the Kohanim eat it. Now, well, they give it to the Kohen first. I think they give it to the Kohen first, and then the Kohen brings it to the Beis Hamikdash. They bring it to the Kohen, and he brings it to the Beis Hamikdash. So the Bechar that the Kohanim get, and they also get, the Kohanim have another option of being rejoicing, and that is Chaza v'shoik. The Chaza v'shoik, which is the chest and the thigh of the shlamim, of the peace offerings of anyone that all the peace offerings, they get the Chaza v'shoik. So therefore, the Kohanim had all these, had all this, all these Chaza v'shoiks, the thigh and the chests of all these sacrifices. So they basically had enough to rejoice on the holidays. So they had all of these options to have simcha, to have joy. So they wouldn't need to bring their own new sacrifice for Shalmei Simcha, because they have these other animals that they're getting, these other parts of the animals that they're getting. Now, can you fulfill the obligation with birds or with menachos? So the Mishnah ends off, no. It's not fulfilled with chatas ha'oif, with a sin offering of a bird, or with a mincha, a meal offering, that you don't fulfill the obligation. Now, this is applicable to kayanim, because the kayanim are the ones who would eat a part of the bird and of the mincha. And the kayanim you might think, oh, well, maybe they could fulfill their obligation of simcha, and the answer is no, they don't. They don't fulfill their obligation of simcha with these bird offerings. Okay, the bird offering would be like a chatas bird offering, a sin offering that was a chatas. So such an offering would the kohen would get to eat, but he doesn't fulfill simcha with that. Now, what about the burnt offering? That's a bird. He doesn't get any of it to eat. So there's no question. He can't get simcha. None of it is eaten. The bird offering, the oila, but the bird offering of a chatas, he does get to eat. The kohen gets from that to eat, and therefore, you might think maybe he could fulfill his mitzvah of simcha, and the Mishnah says no, that it's there's no simcha only with basar behema, with meat of an animal. Okay. The Gemara then says that, and it deals with this issue that we touched upon about bringing oilos on. In other words, oilas re'iyah. You bring that burnt offering for the holiday burnt offering for seeing Hashem and being seen by Hashem. That burnt offering is called an oilas re'iyah. Is brought on the chol hamoyed, the Mishnah said, from chulin. It has to be from unconsecrated foods, and it's brought on chol hamoyed. Now, why did it mention the oila of chol hamoyed is brought from unconsecrated foods? Why doesn't it mention the oila of the Yom Tov? It mentions the oila of chol hamoyed. Now, we know that you're officially supposed to bring, well, at least we think it's supposed to be on the first day you're bringing it. And if you didn't bring it the first day, you could bring it all the other days, right? That's the understanding we have, although we haven't gone through an official Gemara about it. But the understanding is that you would bring it. The truth is that we did have a Gemara on first page that did touch upon that as well. That it mentioned on Beis Amud Aleph. It did mention about Kulan Tashlumen, that they're all a Tashlumen. That if a person missed out on the first day, a person because they were lame but they got healed on the second day, would they be obligated to bring it? So the truth is, we did touch upon that is the first day an obligation more than the other days or not. So the concept of the oila, it is surprising that our Mishnah is talking about chol hamoyed. So it sounds like maybe on chol hamoyed it has to be from unconsecrated monies, but if you bring it on Yom Tov, you could use Meiser money. Again, look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah said oila on chol hamoyed comes from unconsecrated money. What does that mean? That if you bring the oila on the first day of Yom Tov, that would be you could bring Meiser Sheni money. You could use Meiser money for it because you're bringing on a young one. Why would that change anything? So the Gemara asks this question: on Yom Tov you could bring mina Meiser. Why should that be? This is called a davar shebachayva. This is an obligation that you can't fulfill with with your you shouldn't be able to fulfill this obligation with Meiser money. So if you brought on Yom Tov, how can you do that? So the Gemara then says, well, maybe it's coming to tell us that you're not supposed to bring the carbon oilas re'iyah, this sacrifice. Maybe you're not really supposed to bring it on Yom Tov. Maybe you bring it on chol hamoyed. Maybe that's the law. Because on Yom Tov, there are complications with bringing it. And this is the opinion of Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai actually holds that you don't bring an oilas re'iyah on Yom Tov, because he says you bring shlamim, and the reason is because you're allowed to bring the shlamim on Yom Tov because it's called oichel nefesh. You're eating it. The oila you don't eat, so therefore you wouldn't transgress the Yom Tov. And on even the shlamim that you bring, you can't do the smicha. Smicha is when you put both your hands on the animal's head, and you put your entire weight on it. And that is prohibited midrabanan. You're not allowed to ride an animal on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So Beis Shammai says that you can't do that, even for a sacrifice. You can't do that. You can't do smicha on Yom Tov. And therefore, what you would do would be do the smicha before Yom Tov. And you bring the sacrifice, the shlamim, the peace offering, because it's food, it's edible, you're eating it, that you could bring on Yom Tov. Avalai oilos, but you would not bring oilos. You wouldn't bring a burnt offering. So again, you got to get the lingo. The oilos is the burnt offering. Shlamim is the peace offering. Shlamim is eaten by the owners. The oila, the burnt offering, is not eaten by anyone, not even the kohanim. And Beis Shammai is very strict, and they hold that you can't do smicha on Yom Tov, and therefore you would do it before Yom Tov. And you can't even slaughter the oila sacrifice, because it's not considered oichel nefesh. It's not considered food for a human, and therefore you would wait until Chol HaMoed. And so maybe that's what our Mishnah is saying, that the oilos are brought on Chol HaMoed, and you have to bring them from chulin, bring them from unconsecrated monies, but you would not be able to bring them on Yom Tov because it's considered doing something not for food purposes, and Beis Shammai says that's prohibited. Now, Beis Hillel argues on all this. So Beis Shammai says you would be allowed to bring a peace offering, but not this burnt offering, that's the oilas re'iyah. Now, Beis Hillel argues, and he says you can bring both, shlamim, oilos, things that have to be brought today, you can bring them. Oila, bring it today. It needs to be brought. Today is its day. And you can even do smicha on Yom Tov. And the reason you could do smicha, what do you mean? You're not allowed to ride an animal on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to put you can't put your weight on the animal. So how are you putting all your weight, putting both your hands on the head of the animal, putting your entire weight on the animal, and smicha, leaning on it completely? And how could you do that on Yom Tov? The answer is because the rabbis didn't decree their decree to remove the mitzvah of smicha, which means smicha would be an exception to the rule according to Beis Hillel. So Beis Hillel says that you would be allowed to bring the shlamim with the smicha, and you can even bring oilos. And the reason why you can bring oilos is, according to Beis Hillel, is because that's they have the actual word that Beis Shammai uses to exclude gavoya, to exclude something used for Hashem. Beis Shammai says they use it for a different word. They use lachem v'loy lenachrim. It's for you and not for strangers, which means that it wouldn't be allowed for goyim, but for a yid it could be, you're allowed to cook for, and which actually is an interesting situation when you have non-Jewish guests on Yom Tov, because you heat up the food, but you're not allowed to cook food on Yom Tov. You're allowed to cook food for a yid. It says lachem, it's supposed to be for you, but you're not allowed to heat up food. Even though, what do you mean? I have my stove is on Yom Tov. It's Yom Tov. I'm allowed to heat up and cook. I could cook from scratch. I could cook food on Yom Tov, right? You make your meals on Yom Tov. Some people don't cook it before. They cook it on Yom Tov. It's fine. It's kosher. It's good. And you cook it on Yom Tov. And but what happens if you have a non-Jew coming and joining you? So it becomes a big problem. You cannot cook something, heat something up for them special. If you heated up soup for your family, they could also have. Even though it was heated up for your family. But you can't heat up special for them. So if they say, oh, the soup is cold, put it back in the oven, put it back on the stove, and heat it up for me, you wouldn't be allowed to do that. So it's an interesting halacha, because the mitzvah of Yom Tov says specifically that the leniency, the permit, I shouldn't say leniency, the permit of cooking on Yom Tov is specifically for a yid to rejoice. It's like a permit. It's a permit to rejoice for rejoicing purposes. Now, the Beis Shammai learns that it excludes things that are for Hashem, that it's only for you, which means you wouldn't lachem v'lo legavaya. They say it excludes a sacrifice that's like a burnt offering, that you wouldn't be allowed to bring it on Yom Tov, because that's excluded from the word lachem, that you can't even serve Hashem. You can't do something, you can't bring a sacrifice of ha'olah. But Beis Hillel uses the word lachem v'lo lenachrim, and therefore they hold that you could bring a burnt offering on Yom Tov. It's I guess it's considered like it's your needs to do this mitzvah for Hashem. And it says lachem, but that excludes nothing. That excludes a non-Jew. Now, so Beis Hillel says you could bring shlamim and oilos, and you could do smicha. And the Gemara basically is saying, so this sounds very strange, because our Mishnah mentions this concept of the oila, the burnt offering on Chol HaMoed is brought from Chulin.
Yes, give me a minute.
The oila is on Chol HaMoed is brought from Chulin, and the Gemara is trying to figure out, why are we talking about an oila, the oilas re'iyah, the burnt offering of the holidays, that it's brought on the Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of the holiday. Why are we mentioning that it's brought from Chulin only on the intermediate days? Is it because you're not allowed to bring this sacrifice on the first day, because the first day is the actual Yom Tov, and on Yom Tov maybe you can't bring such a sacrifice? But that would follow the view of Beis Shammai, and that's very surprising, because Beis Hillel argues, and we know that we're not going to have a Stam Mishnah. We're not going to have a statement like this as if it's automatic in the view of Beis Shammai, when we have a Beis Hillel that argues and we follow Beis Hillel. So the Gemara therefore says that we have to switch around the words, and it's like a mistake in the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is missing the words. It's called the Chasurei Mechsera, that the Mishnah was learned in a very shorthand way, and it was missing missing some of the words. And the way it's supposed to be read is the oila nedarim and the davos on the Moed are brought on Yom Tov. I'm sorry. Let me start again. Oilais nedarim and nedavos, burnt offerings, not the burnt offering of the holiday, but other burnt offerings. Nedarim and nedavos, where there are two types of pledges. All of these, b'mayed bois, they're brought on Chol HaMoed, but on Yom Tov they are not brought. And then the Mishnah continues and says in the Oilas Re'iyah, the burnt offering of the holiday is brought even on Yom Tov. And when it comes only from unconsecrated monies. And then it jumps to Shalmei Simcha, the rejoicing sacrifice that it comes also from Meiser. You could use your Meiser, Sheni money for it. And then it talks about the Chagigas Yom Tov, Harishon Shal Pesach, the sacrifice called the Chagiga, which was brought on the first day of Pesach. And Beis Shammai says it's brought. How do they keep on? And the Chagiga, the sacrifice that's brought on the first day of Pesach, Beis Shammai says that is brought from only unconsecrated monies, and Beis Hillel says it could be a mixture. It could be brought from Meiser if it's mixed with the unconsecrated money. And so we're going to stop here. That's the correction of the Mishnah, and what comes after this is a brisa that basically it says a similar thing as the Mishnah did. Okay. Yes. Yes.
Don't sign your plate. Have to talk to you for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Some good news. Two great Chachamim moving to Regent's Park in the last 2 weeks. Rabbi Metz is here and Yitzchok Schwartz is here. And we are training them now to use these tablets, and they'll hopefully contribute to the shiur.
Amazing.
So,
great.
Yeah. So, like I said, we unfortunately lost Rabbi Weberman, but we did gain 2 other great Talmud Chachamim for the shiur.
Okay, Baruch Hashem, that we have more people.
And a question for you.
Yeah.
Question for you. I had the answer to that once, but I forgot. We spoke about earlier, a few weeks ago, about Shaul is a Balat HaOv. Remember Shaul in the Balat HaOv when he brought up Shmuel's spirit?
You know what? I'm not sure if I heard the question. I mean, I didn't understand the question. Say it again.
Okay, we mentioned Shaul and the Balat HaOv. Then he went to Balat HaOv and he raised Shmuel.
Yeah. Okay. Shaul raised the Balat HaOv, and he raised Shmuel.
Which vendor?
Yes. My question
what's
is,
the question? Yeah.
Why did Shmuel rise from below? You expect Shmuel to come from above.
No, he was upside down. Is that what you said? There was like a different how he came. He came like, normally people come upside down. He came straight up or something.
Yes. But why did it come from below? You expect Shmuel to come from above, from Shemayim.
From heaven, not from hell.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever heard an answer to that. That's an interesting thing. I mean, we don't consider hell in down below and heaven above. That's also, maybe an answer. That it's not necessarily the way we see it is space, in space, hell and heaven. You know what I mean? So I don't know if it's surprising that he came from below.
Yeah.